Hello, I'm Rebecca the Maths Lady and welcome to this video which is all about teaching capacity. In this video we'll explore how we teach children to have a deep understanding of what capacity is. We'll talk about the key units of capacity and how we teach them. We'll look at the ways of measuring capacity and the equipment we use for measuring capacity that children should become familiar with. We'll look at reading scales. We'll talk about some key activities that children should do with capacity. We'll look at calculations with capacity, and we'll talk about converting capacities between different units at a foundational level. I'm going to come back to measure conversions in another video later in this series. There are no particular videos you need to have watched before this one, which means it's yet another topic that's a real leveller for your children, which is lovely when you just need a change of pace and atmosphere. And as with most of the applied topics in this series, you can run this topic all day, developing practical science and craft activities that extend it and consolidate it and work across the curriculum. Right, let's get started. First of all, what is capacity? Capacity is the space within a container. So this has no capacity at all because you can't fit anything in it. This container has a capacity of 1 litre, or just over 1 litre. It's got a nice scale on here. And it just so happens that that fits beautifully onto that, because that has a volume of 1,000 cubic centimetres, or 1 litre, which is the same thing. And that has a capacity of just over 1 litre, and it's the same shape. While volume is usually measured in cubic centimetre, capacity is usually measured in millilitres, but they are the same thing. If this was ice, if you melted it, its volume would remain the same as it melts, but it would create exactly 1 millilitre of water. And it doesn't have to melt to be a millilitre, that is still a millilitre. The key units that we work with children at this stage are millilitres and litres, and they need to know that there are 1,000 millilitres in a litre, just as there are 1,000 millimetres in a metre, which takes a little bit of thinking about, but is also true. 1,000 milligrams in a gram, and so on. Milli comes from a Latin root, which means 1,000, which is a bit of a surprise because people tend to think it's worth a million. And that's a contradictory bit of vocabulary that children really need to get to grips with. The other unit of measure that's on the English national curriculum is pints. Today I'll touch on gallons as well. And of course, if your curriculum has different measures of capacity on it, you're going to need to adapt this lesson for that. So to teach this subject well, you're going to need to have lots of devices for measuring capacity. This set of measuring jugs is excellent. I've got a litre measuring jug, a pint measuring jug, and a smaller one. And I find them very useful in my kitchen as well. It's a really good idea to look at measuring spoons while you're doing capacity. Buckets are great, especially if, like this one, they have scales inside. I don't know if you can quite see that, but it's got a scale for measuring litres up the side inside. I found this pipette around my house, which is graduated in half millilitres. You might find medicine spoons. There's all sorts of stuff you can find that's great for measuring capacity. And you want to assemble as much of that kit as you possibly can before you start work on this subject. And then once you do start measuring the capacity of different objects, you're going to be filling them up and pouring the liquid from them into measuring devices like this one. And very quickly, children are going to have to think about using scales. So in this one, only 600 and 800 are marked. So they're going to have to see that that's 700. They're going to need to estimate in between. And you'll need to talk about looking at the bottom of the meniscus of liquid as well, because there's a little bit of spread in the top and the bottom of the ways that you could read off a level of liquid, and we read it from the bottom. The meniscus is that curve in the liquid. So as a teacher, I would wander around my classroom and talk to children as they start to try to interpret scales and make sensible estimates for capacities when they are reading between scale points. And I'd simply be diagnosing whether the children in my class have confidently got it or not. If I've 1 or 2 individuals who are struggling, I would sit and work with them for a while. If it's larger groups, I'd get my counting stick out and set up scales on my counting stick that are like the scales on the measuring devices you're using, and focus on getting them to estimate values in between marked values. Okay, next there are all sorts of classic capacity activities your children should be doing. Of course, you can give them any container and ask them to estimate the capacity, and then you can fill that container with water and pour it into the measuring jugs to check how accurate they were. You can have a competition within your class to see who can get closest. You can do great activities where you just give children different containers and ask them to place them in order of capacity. The answers are often not what you or they expect, and you want to have rich discussions about it as they try and estimate and reason and justify their answers and then explain perhaps why they were wrong. Estimating three-dimensional space is really difficult because children tend to focus on one dimension, which container is the tallest, and it's really difficult to shift and get them to focus on the fact that they're imagining how many millilitres or cubic centimetres will fit into an object, and even when they understand that, it's just still tricky to do. You can buy all sorts of measuring containers from equipment suppliers. I've got these two. Now they do have scales on. I'm just going to conceal the scales and pose the question, which of those would contain more liquid? With the scales gone, it's great work. And you're consolidating your understanding of cylinders and laying foundational work for future work on volumes of cylinders. Right, let's talk about calculations with capacity. This is an opportunity to review your work on the 4 operations in a new context. So can your children calculate totals of capacity? Perhaps the capacities have decimal numbers in them and they need to rehearse their work with decimals. Can they find the difference between 2 different capacities? Can they puzzle out answers when some capacity is removed? And of course, both of those situations require subtraction. If you've got several containers the same size, can they work out the total capacity of all the containers? And that requires multiplication. And if they've got a very large container, can they work out how many of a smaller container that larger container could fill? And that's division. And can they also share the contents of the larger container into equal portions? And that's also division. So they're the kinds of contexts you need to set up to check that your children deeply understand what they're doing with their 4 operations. And doing so will really help you diagnose any gaps in their understanding of their number work and give you an opportunity to target those and fill them in an appropriate way. And you can stick with whole numbers, or as I've already said, you can extend into decimals. You could do calculations that require long multiplication or long division. And you can set up problems that get children thinking about the different ways they can express their answers to division when the answer is not a whole number. And if any of those present problems for your children, you'll find that there's a video where I explain the detail of that particular topic. And you can find all of those videos at www.authenticmaths.co.uk/videos. Okay, finally, let's look at unit conversions. Now, the first stage of doing this is to get children to express the capacity of different containers in different ways. So if we just look at this jug, if we found that a capacity was, say, 1 litre, 100 millilitres, we would expect children to be able to understand that that is also 1,100 millilitres. They need to know that there are 1,000 millilitres in a litre, and if you're expressing capacity in litres and millilitres, it's quite easy to change that into just millilitres. And you can also change it into just litres, so it'd be 1.1 litres. So what I'm saying is that children should be able to express a quantity in 3 different ways where they can really see that quantity and imagine it. This is not about using standard techniques of multiplying and dividing by 10, 100 and 1,000. This is about being able to see what's going on and just knowing the basic fact that there are 1,000 millilitres in a litre. We also expect children to develop a sense of the size of a pint. Now, these measuring jugs are a good start because that's a litre and that's a pint. But it is quite useful to drum in a conversion fact here. A pint is 568 millilitres. At the very least, they should know that a pint is just over half a litre. It's an arbitrary fact. It's not a logical bit of maths. So like all conversion facts, it just has to be learnt and drilled and practiced until it's truly known. As a teacher, it's really helpful if you also know that 8 pints are a gallon. and that therefore a gallon is about 4.55 litres, mainly because it's fun to play around with large quantities of liquid. And actually going beyond the curriculum does help anchor the facts that you're trying to focus on into a wider context, which is helpful for learning them. I'm sure you can find some fantastic context for using that knowledge. Maybe when you're raising money at the summer fair and you've got a teacher in the stocks and you're throwing sponges at them, the children can pay different amounts of money for different amounts of water to dip their sponges in. Or if you're really cunning as a teacher, you can find a way to get them to throw sponges at each other. When you're working on capacity, I would always set a homework of asking children to go home and find containers with different capacities, write down what the container is, write down what the capacity is. There's so much around in the bathroom, in the kitchen, all over the house, and it's really nice if they can do some display work on that as well. I would definitely try and include some kinds of activity where they're using spoons to measure different quantities of liquid, whether that's within cooking or within art or within science. There's easy and lovely extension work where you ask children to research different measures of capacity used over time and do some work on that. And of course they can try converting capacities the other way. If we're saying there are 568 millilitres in a pint, what's the relationship the other way? How many pints in a litre, say? So your takeaways from this video are that we need to give children a really deep multisensorial experience of what capacity is that engages them in real challenge of trying to estimate capacities and compare the capacities of different containers. And once they've done those estimations, they should check them with real liquid that they fill the container with and pour it into measuring jugs or whatever you're using to measure capacity. They need to know that there are 1,000 millilitres in a litre, and they need to know that there are 568 millilitres in a pint, or that a pint is just over half a litre. They should be confident with reading scales on capacity measuring devices, and they should also be confident completing problems where they have to calculate with capacity. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please don't feel you have to do everything in it to be a great teacher. Hopefully it's just given you plenty of ideas as to how you can really bring this topic to life and make it a deep learning experience and a fun learning experience for the children in your class. If you have any questions, comments or ideas for activities that you'd like to share, please add them in the comments to this video. Your comments are of tremendous value, and please do join me for my live streams, which are 9 AM British time every Sunday morning, and ask anything you'd like to ask or just come and chat. Hope you'll join me again soon for another video. The next one in this series will be about teaching weight. Have a great day. Bye for now.